really want to talk to you about is, for those that haven't really experienced it, is talking about some real world stuff. I've been using it out there for a while in the workforce, and I'm noticing a range of problems that people uncover in their daily life trying to do it. So I want to talk about the planning phase, the content phase, the design phase, and the build phase. And all the little areas where responsive web design can really rock and can be an absolute pain in the ass. So, briefly about it. So, we all know that we're living in this world of mobile now. I mean, it's a given. You know, there are some sites like Twitter and Facebook that are up and over 50% or hovering on 50% use. Do you all look at your stats? Yes? Can someone throw out a figure? What's your mobile use, very broadly, on your website? Does anyone know roughly? 5%, 10%, 15%? 30%? 2. Oh, 2%. I thought, oh my God, that's pretty high. I mean, it's worth checking out all the time. We should be out there checking what we're doing. And there's also this massive explosion of devices. Now, 2 or 3 years ago, when I was talking to clients, they'd be saying, well, 5 years ago, and then 2 or 3, or maybe 3 years ago, I need to be on social media, I need a Facebook page. And then the next phase after that was, I need mobile. And now people are starting to sell, which is great. They're saying, I want responsive web design. So the mobile ones are really hard one to address because there were so many different devices out there in the marketplace. Now, this is not going to be talk on mobile, which would be just a pain in the ass. What I really want to talk about is responsive and where it fits into this scenario. So you could say that responsive web design is just basically about creating a page that can grow and shift and change to suit any type of device. So it can be widescreen, or it can collapse gradually and fit an iPad tall, an iPad wide, an iPhone, or anything like that. So instead of building specifically for devices like we used to in the old days, we can now build something that can shift and change and suit any device. Make sense? Now, Ethan McCoke came out with this 3 rules about 2 years ago. And the 3 rules he talks about are that it should be a flexible grid, and it should have flexible images, and that it should have media queries. The funny thing is that you can do a responsive web design without anything. In 2004, a guy called Cameron Adams came up with something called resolution-dependent layout. Does anyone remember this at all? Okay, well anyway, in 2004, you guys were probably still in kindergarten. But for us old people building websites back then, there was this thing called resolution-dependent layouts. And you could build a layout that shifted and changed. And it just didn't use media queries. They weren't invented yet. So it used JavaScript. And in those days, we didn't use liquid layouts for that. We used fixed width layouts. But it solved problems for many sites. So we used to build 1,000 wide, an 800 wide, a 600 wide, and a narrow one for screen for mobile devices. And so there was responsive web design for many years, but it just didn't match some of these things. But the bottom line is these 3 are great guidelines to follow. So what are the strengths of responsive web design? Well, I think there are basically just 2 great things about it. The first one is this concept of device agnostic. When you go to this true mobile experience, you've got these problems of trying to dish up to exact devices. Whereas responsive design, one of the things it does really well is it just says, I'm going to shift and change and bugger you. You could be wide, you could be small, you could be narrow, and it'll work. Yeah? The second thing is, it's very easy to build. I've just run a workshop today, and 20 minutes, the class has never done it before, and we built a responsive grid-based layout. It's incredibly easy to build. Very hard to plan, but very easy to build. So what are its weaknesses? Well, one of the funny things about responsive web design is a lot of people think it's the total answer. But the bizarre thing about it is, it's purely visual. A true responsive web design only solves the visual aspect. It means we can shrink and grow a page. But it doesn't solve bigger issues like bandwidth. Like if you're trying to put in a very large image, how are you going to change that when it goes down to a small screen? You're still going to bring in the same image. What about movies? You're going to bring in a very large movie and let that be seen by a small screen device? Or you're just going to turn it off? So responsive web design solves some really good things, but it doesn't solve some others. The other thing which I think is more hilarious than this is everyone's focusing on the technical, but the reality is our biggest problem is the user experience. A lot of people are doing it. I'm sure a lot of you are in the room, as you said, are doing it. Have you nailed the user experience? Do you find it very hard to shift between the different devices and have something that's really smooth and people can use really well, a small screen, a medium screen, and a large screen? It's a very hard thing to nail really well. And of course, there's project management. Then they get this problem, I'm sure you all have. Have you ever sat in front of a client and they said, I want an app, or I want a mobile website? And you think, Jesus, how do I answer this? There's so many problems you've got going on here. How do you address that and talk to them? Well, when I'm talking to a client, there's a lot of times when they don't need a mobile website at all these days. A responsive website will answer their needs very quickly. And you can sit there and say, what are you really after? You want something that will work on an iPhone, an iPad, and other devices. And you show them a couple of examples and say, that's what we want. But in some cases, you have to explain to them what the fundamental differences are. And a very basic way I can explain it is that websites are fundamentally about tasks. People come to your site to perform a range of tasks. And there might be a time when a large subset of your audience are coming and hitting your site with a mobile device, and they're trying to perform a subset of those tasks. Yeah? And for those cases, it might make perfect sense to deliver it as a mobile website. And a good example might be something like a newspaper. They've got a very large site that does millions of pages and all that sort of thing. However, people might be coming with a mobile device very specifically to get news and weather and latest information. And that makes perfect sense still to build a mobile website. One of the things that I'm really worried about seeing is that some people are starting to see responsive web design as the answer, and they're just scrapping the other solutions. But there's some really good cases where you should be still doing mobile, or still we should be doing that. So it's not the total answer, but it's part of it. Has anyone heard the term REST? Here we go. So, what's the term? Oh, sorry, I'm putting you on the spot. Responsive and server-side. So I was driving along one day, and there's a guy called Luke Dabrowski. He's talking on a podcast, and I've just built this first, it wasn't the first, it was a responsive website. I'm feeling like, right, this is really the answer. But there was this funny thing in the back of my mind, like, it really only solved part of the problem. And I couldn't put my finger on exactly what the problem was. And I'm driving along, and he's being interviewed, and he comes up with this phrase. And have you ever had it where you hear someone say something and it actually hits you in the eye? It's like, I think it hit me so hard, I pull off the side of the road, like, oh my God. Because he said something that had been in the back of my mind for so long. He said responsive web design is such an easy choice that people are making. It's such a tempting solution because it's so easy for web designers because you don't need to touch the server. Yeah? All it's doing is fixing the pictures and things like that. It is such an easy thing. I'm a front-end guy. I embrace it in seconds. It solves a lot of my problems. I'm not a back-end guy. I'm terrified of server stuff. So for me, responsive web design is a great thing. But is it the perfect answer? And the reality is, as we move into bigger websites where you're trying to deliver bigger action and trying to deliver, rich media across, we're going to have to start moving to server-side as well. All those things we learned in mobile, we have to bring in. We're going to have to be starting to do it. Now, on small little websites, responsive web design is fine. But if you've got a big site with lots of media, there's going to become a time where you're going to use JavaScript and trick browse and load up images in different ways, or get onto the server and doing it. Would you agree? Not even nodding. You disagree strongly. Okay. Now, the one thing I find most interesting is, I don't know whether you guys are reading articles out there about responsive web design. There's millions of them. It's the flavour of the month, and it's on everything. And almost everything at the moment is responsive images. Would you agree? Everything's about responsive images. But the thing I find bizarre about it is when you're building real-world sites, it's a tiny aspect of the job. Tiny. The actual build of responsive web design is like 5% of the job. These are arbitrary figures, but bottom line is most of your job is planning. Yeah? It's not this little part of the build. And I think a lot of people are so focused on responsive design as a technique that they're forgetting that it's part of a huge picture and really how it's going to work for user experience. There where all the work goes in, not this little part of technically how you build it. So be aware that it's not as simple as the build. A lot of it is about planning. So I'm going to quickly whip through some of the things that I've uncovered and tried about when I've had to be involved in projects and planning. Who's ever heard the term mobile first? Yeah? So a lot of you have heard it all before. Whether it's mobile first or small screen first, I'll give you two examples. I had one job a while ago, late last year, where it was a very full-on web application for builders out in the field who had to do sort of information, so they had to be able to work in the office and work out in the field. And so it had to be, it was responsive, but it had to work across all different devices, and the experience had to be quite smooth across all those things. Now we started with mobile. We started with sketching, tiny screens. The wireframes were tiny screens. The prototyping was with tiny screens. The design was with tiny screens. And then we went to large screen. And what was amazing about it was that all the problems were addressed at the tiny size. When you start with small, people really have to get to the core. It's a tiny screen. What the hell can you do in that little frame? So you get rid of all the crap and you focus on really what is this app trying to do? What is this function of this web trying to do? When you have to start with small screen, you really get to the core of it. And then when you get bigger, suddenly you can relax, you've got more space. Job number 2, going right through right now. I've been on the phone with a designer almost in tears, but she's been in tears, not me. A different project, totally the other way around. So they've done beautiful wireframing, and they think they're doing a great job, and now they've started design, and now they're fixated on large screen. They've spent weeks mocking up large screen. So now we've moved away from the small screen, and everything is focusing on large screen. Buttons are being refined, images are being set, it's all beautiful looking in widescreen. And then now, the poor designer is now going to try and ram that back into a small screen device. It's a painful job. She's going through hell. If she'd started, and it's not her decision, it was the client, if she'd been able to start with small screen, now it's not always the answer. There's sometimes you have to work at both ends. But what I'm finding is that if you can start with small screen, it is so much easier to go large than it is to start with large and try and force fit into a small screen. Does that make sense? Here's another thing. Prototype debugging. Just prototype at every single stage. When I'm starting a website for someone, and in fact this job that's just going through now, my very first job is not going to be start doing a big build. I will literally make my own little framework grid for this site, and I'll show them, and I'll sit with them and we'll move it in and out, and show them how things will drop and move. Very simple little box diagrams, all made out of HTML, and I'll get them to sign off on that very early. We'll see what it looks like very quickly. What's it going to look like in various devices when we move it in and out at different sizes. Right up front, we want to nail that. And the other thing is we want to be testing how it's working throughout the process. A lot of people go through this sort of thing and they don't test till the very end. Test as often as you can. One of my clients is fantastic. It's the Australian Museum. We just built a full responsive website. One of the great things we've got is a captive audience. At any stage, you walk up at the front end with a device, show it to some users and say, what do you think of this? Give them to play with it. But everyone's got friends and family. You can all test on other people. Don't ever build something and then at the very end, shove it in a user's face and say, what do you think? Test as early as you can. Another big point is breakpoints. Do we all know what a breakpoint is? A breakpoint is where you decide the layout's going to change. So you might have a 3-column layout, and at a certain point, you decide it's going to drop to 2 columns or 1 column or something like that. But technically now they call it a breakpoint. So when responsive design first came out, clients would say religiously, I want to be 1024 breakpoint, and I want a 760 breakpoint, and a 420 breakpoint, and a 360. You know what these are? The different Apple devices. Of course, there's thousands of devices on the market now. We should never, ever be breaking based on devices. We should be breaking based on content. My partner thinks I'm insane. She comes into the study and I'm in there late at night, and I'm moving screens in and out going, I'm obsessed with watching it go in and out. But a lot of my time is trying to work out where is that perfect point to drop that column. And it's got nothing to do with where it sits in a particular device. It's got to do with where that line length is most comfortable. Where does it suddenly become a bit tight? That's where I want to drop it. Make sense? It's not about devices. Remember we said this is device agnostic. We should be making breakpoints based on the user experience and the content, not based on some arbitrary device that in 3 months could have a different screen size. Agree? Disagree? You're all just sitting there. I want some anger. UX consistency, another quick one. Who's heard of Smashing Magazine? Hands up. Who thinks it rocks? Yep, great website. Who's ever moved that in and out in the browser? Have you seen it and just thought, holy fuck, what's happening? So here's the thing, it's a beautiful thing. But the people who do it were obviously on crack. What they decided to do was they put up a nav here and then said, what we're going to do, we're going to stuff their lines. When it moves to this website size, we're going to jump it right over here. And if you're following the nav, you go, move around, oh, it's going over here. Now, Roger introduced me to this concept quite a few years ago when we were talking about people with cognitive impairment. A lot of people do this when you're using a website. You just may not be aware of it. But here's how you do it. You're showing a friend something, you go, I just click here, and I click down here, and then it's over here. Have you ever seen yourself do that? That's cognitive memory. You, on the website, know where something is, you've mapped meaning to it. And what happens if someone takes that button away? You're like, I go here. What? It's gone. And suddenly there's this feeling of rage. Sometimes you punch the monitor. But there's this feeling that you've been lost in translation. Well, Smashing Magazine breaks that mold very quickly. If you move the website screen slightly, it can radically alter the user experience. So, there is a big difference between widescreen and mobile. However, the transitions. You should not shock the user on the way through. Yes? No? Agree? Again, test frequently. We rave about that. Content. Here's a real shock to you. Do you know what the most important thing on an outside responsive? Of course, it's content. A lot of people forget this in the process, but here's the other problem. Most of the clients I speak to have this preconceived idea of what mobile is. Mobile, I'm sure you've got this a lot. Two things. Mobile is people who are time poor and bandwidth poor. Who's heard that before? It's bullshit. We know now most people use their devices on the toilet. It's a fact. Here's the thing. Most people are now using their devices sitting at home, on the TV, or around the home. They have lots of time, and they've got great bandwidth. So this idea that mobile is only for these sort of very fast users, and of course there are those as well, but we can't do this preconceived idea that if it's going to be mobile, if it's going to be small screen, it's going to be tiny content because they've got no time. Yeah? So what we should be doing is start to write wisely, think wisely about our content. Are there any content creators in here? What? Anyway, there's a whole movement out there called responsive content. And some of the things people are starting to go back to is early days of web. You remember when we wrote, with pyramid writing? That means that people don't have to invest a large amount of time to read a whole page. You can give them a bit of text, and they can decide whether they're going to commit to that information. Instead of reading 3/4 of the way through the page and going, well, that was shit, you want them to be able to get that information quickly and go, okay, I'll keep reading. Make sense? There's things like show and hide as well. Obvious stuff that you can possibly try, allowing people to look at a bit of it and then open it up if they want to continue further. And the final thing that's really blowing people's mind is everyone who's building a responsive web design, including myself, the standard thing is just drop a column. Yeah? You have 2 columns or 3 columns, you just tuck one below. Is that really the solution? What if you've got sponsors who pay money for their ads and you just say, bugger you, when you get small screen, you're going to the very bottom of my page. And yes, it's 3 kilometres down there if you scroll, but I don't care about you. Your sponsors may not like that. And there's movements in there called content following, where with bits of JavaScript, you can put in empty containers, and instead of dropping, you shunt content across into the middle of other content. Now, is this the answer? I'm not saying it is, but what I'm saying is, don't just assume you can drop columns. Start to think wiser. Make sense? Not much money. Okay, design. I've just talked about this, but it's the same principle again. A lot of people start well, so they start planning small. But when they get to design immediately, because it's such a paradigm people understand, they go straight back into designing for the large screen, including the core designer that I'm working with at the moment. Here's another thing that I find interesting. You spend weeks and weeks designing this beautiful architecture, and the homepage has a visual hierarchy. You've got a main banner, and you might have secondary banners or something like that. And you think, this is really important because you spend a lot of time getting this hierarchy right. And then when it shrinks down to small screen, bang, suddenly they're all the same size. What? Really, we should be trying to make sure the hierarchy is maintained through anything. If you've spent the effort to make this bigger on the homepage, why would it also be worthwhile making it bigger when it's a small screen? Yeah? So you should be really thinking about it and spending a lot of time moving in and out between different sizes and saying, okay, there's my banner. Am I still getting some hierarchy when I'm traveling down through the sizes? Make sense? Another one that's sort of quite interesting, and it's really a freaky thing for people who've got millions of images on their website. But if we're trying to tailor good content to different devices, not only should we possibly doing smaller images to smaller devices, who may have different screen sizes and bandwidth, but should we be doing the same image? A quick example, you may put an image of a person standing in a room and you have a lot of space around them. But once you get down to a small screen, do you want that person to be a tiny little ant in the middle of the photo? There's a possibility it may be much better cropped tighter when you get down to a small screen. Now these are things we should be thinking about in art direction, etc. Except it's freaky when you're thinking about thousands of images across the site. Now we get to build. Who's ever used or heard of Twitter Bootstrap? Dear God, is that the most rockiest thing on earth? Who likes it? Who hates it? Why do you hate it?
Why?
The two of you all talk at once.
I'm sick of sites looking the same.
Sorry?
I'm sick of sites looking the same.
Ah, yeah, there you go. That's fine. Why do you hate it?
Because it's better.
Sorry?
It's better.
You can do better.
No, there is better.
I can't hear you.
There is better.
Oh, there's better. Of course there's better. I hate it for two reasons. I was in the middle of building this amazing framework that I thought, being wanker that I am, was going to rock the world. And then I came out and I went, God, I've done things better than I could have done. So there was that. But one thing I've got, it's a dirty little secret for you. Even though I love frameworks, in all the responsive websites I've built, I have never used one of these frameworks. Never. And do you know why? Because most of the time I don't design them. Even when I have, they don't seem to fit. What I end up finding is I build my own grids. I roll my own. Has anyone had that problem? So they sound great in theory, but most of the websites I get are designed by someone else. But what's great about them is you can use the same concepts as what these people do. These grids have really abstracted out the layout, and that's a great thing to learn from. So when I'm building websites now, I try and bring that same mentality in. Rather than build things in location-based styling, you think about how you can abstract it all down and build your own little grid. That's still fine, but learn from what's out there, and again, test frequently. Does anyone roll their own for everything? Same sort of thing? Okay, here's a couple of quick CSS things we're just about to wrap up. So one of the things you have to debate, and it's entirely up to you, is that classic thing that you may have 4 or 5 style sheets or 4 or 5 little areas of a CSS file. And are you going to overlap them or have them all unique? Now a quick example would mean that you have a width of 700 to 600, 600 to 500, 500 to 400. So you've got different styles going on in different areas. Now you can do it in 2 ways. You can have each one a unique chunk that doesn't overlap. Or you can overlap them so that you can write styles more efficiently. There's no right answer here, because I found that both of them work really well in different places. Sometimes it's more efficient to write once and just write little rules that adapt as you go up. But in other cases I'm finding that I'm overriding so heavily that it's better to keep them contained. And what I'm trying to say here is there's no rule. Sometimes you have to do it based on the site. Anyone disagree? Agree? Had problems with it? No? Last one on the pain of developing a site. So there's a tiny browser that doesn't support media queries. And it's probably a hard one to guess, but can anyone guess which browser doesn't support media queries? I think Bruce is giving away 10 books to SitePoint for anyone who can guess.
Is it Internet Explorer?
Holy shit! It's Internet Explorer! IE 6 to 8 don't support media queries at all, as we all know. But there's 2 quick solutions. One is just respond.min.js, tiny little piece of JavaScript which forces IE 6 to 8 to be able to understand media queries. Piece of piece, technically speaking. The other one is to use a conditional comment. On some government websites I've done, including the Australian Museum, where at that point they decided they didn't want to use JavaScript as the solution, you can actually just pull one of the style sheets into a conditional comment, take out the media query aspect, and you've got a fixed width style sheet for IE, and all the others get responsive. So it's very quick to be able to deliver a non-JavaScript thing that works across as well. So there's always an alternative. We're going to talk in detail about all this. We're running a bit on time, so here's a quick thing. Who's seen responsive tables and all these great things where you can shift and move? They're great, aren't they? Have you ever tested them? Have you ever looked at what users... One of the great ones actually changes access. Have you seen that one? Where it starts down, and when you move it, it goes across. Can you imagine a cognitive hassle that could be for some people? So just be aware that while some of them are amazingly cool, they could present problems, challenges for people who are used to looking at a table in a certain way, and you're possibly reverting the whole concept of the table for them. So they're good and bad, just test frequently often. Now there's just so much discussion out there on rich media and how to deal with it now. And what I'd probably suggest, if you're going to look right now, CSS Tricks has got this amazing, pretty well a canonical discussion about that going on right now, which is which responsive image solution should you use? Have anyone seen that article? It's just incredible. Go there and you've got a chart of all the responsive options, including PHP server-based ones and JavaScript-based ones, and just, standard media query-based ones. But there are so many options out there now, and including the thing that you may have to build your own. The Australian Museum site we've got at the moment has nothing in there at the moment, apart from just sort of resizing images. But as soon as I get back into Sydney, we're rolling out a JavaScript-based one for that company. So there are so many options out there available to you. Finally, there's the after. One of the things I'm amazed about is that often people build a site and they just bugger off in the distance. And I used to love doing that as well. But really we should be building style guides. What we should be doing, if you've gone to the trouble of building this beautiful grid structure and you've got all your buttons and all your little style sheets, then really all those things should be documented so that someone else can come on after you, especially if you've done really good object-oriented CSS, where people could take little things and put them together and rebuild off your styles. Yeah? Of course, all of you build little style guides afterwards so people can follow them. The other thing I'll just say as a final note is the job is never done. The Australian Museum website went live 3 weeks ago. That's the latest one I've done. And we've used HTML5, but with no HTML5 elements at this point. And it doesn't use any JavaScript. We're testing it for 6 weeks, and then we're going to roll out a second iteration, which will move everything to HTML5 elements with a shim, HTML5 shim. And then we're also going to be putting in respond.js. Then soon after that, we're going to be rolling out a version where all the images will be swapped out, and small ones will be pushed into JavaScript, etc. And then we'll probably be looking at REST in a few months after that. So we're rolling out a bunch of sprints. We're getting live and moving. Really, a website should never be finished. We should always be back in there and working out how to build. So basically, here's some quick points to wrap up. Fundamentally, I'm sure you all agree that in 6 months, 4 months' time, none of us will be building a fixed width layout again. Can you really see a time when you can honestly look a client in the face and say, yep, I can build it 1,000 pixels wide, and that's it? It's just not going to happen. 6 months, 12 months from now, you'll be doing it on every website. I do it even when a client doesn't want me to. I just say, look, we're going to build it this way. Because I don't want to be going back there 3 months later and having to put back in something. So it's going to be the base. Whether you do REST on top of it, or mobile on top of it, or apps on top of it, regardless of any of that, it's not saying it should replace these. It should be the base for everything we build. And in some cases, that's all you need. In some cases, you need more. But as point 2 says, you may still need REST or mobile or something else. The second thing I want to stress, or number 3 actually, is the build is only part of the process. I see so many people focusing on the build, how we build this site responsibly. And really so much of it comes down to planning and wireframing and prototyping and making sure the site rocks at all these different sizes, that the build is just a tiny aspect of that. If possible, now it's not always possible. Sometimes you have to retroactively fit a fixed width site into a responsive site. But if it's possible, I found it a great way to work with mobile first. It means you're freer, as we talked about before. And the other thing, as we said, test. Test with friends, test with family, test at wireframes, test at prototypes, test as you build it, test as you design it, test at every single stage. I cannot believe that people aren't testing enough. It's really the backbone of everything you do. And I think that's it. Thank you very much. Any questions? Damn, we've got a plan to catch. Sorry.
I think it might be relevant for other people in the room, but there's a lot of content management systems.
Ah, yes.
So designing to the content and checking the flow, and then somebody comes in and changes it as they can.
Yes. Although I have to say that when we're talking about content, we're not talking about the fine details of a specific page. We're talking about content chunks. You've got paragraphs of text. Generally, we're saying that we want them to be fit within that comfortable reading zone. Like the 2 alphabets is maximum you want to go wide. So it's not saying on every particular page you're tweaking. It's more just you're making sure that these main chunks of content aren't squashed together too tightly, or that the line length is too broad. Trying to make sure they're comfortable. I thought you were going to ask something which is harder, which is, what do you think responsive? Which is a much bigger question. I'm sure half the people in the room have to address. And I have no answer to that, except getting to see this. That's really practical.
What kind of tools do you use for wireframing and prototyping?
Sorry?
What kind of tools do you use for wireframing?
Well, I'm very old school, so I'll often do very rough stuff on paper and do very quick stuff like that, and then I'll just build in HTML. Just very simple. There's a lot of tools out there. The one thing I don't like about a lot of those wireframing and prototyping tools is they use analogies. They use a lot of sort of fake things. And what I've found is that when I've shown them to people, you're actually expecting them to understand 2 levels of abstraction. You're asking them to understand the abstraction of a fake wireframe and that it's a fake website. So when I try and do it, I try and make it a real website, just with fake content in there. So that they're not having to understand 2 levels of abstraction as well. Does that make sense? So I've seen a lot of those great tools, but you have to sit down with people and explain that it's a wireframe or a prototype, and then that's the purpose of a website. So I just find it easier to build something strong. Yep.
How effective is that resizing the browser window as a way to tell when you're going to get on a phone? Is that something that you sound like you do?
I'm sorry, I'm slightly deaf, so you have to speak up.
Yeah, resizing the browser window.
Yep.
Is that an effective way of seeing what you're going to get on a mobile phone?
It's not the answer, but it's a great starting point. You know, one thing I do love about it, especially using Opera, which can go right into a tiny size. Anyone knows that Chrome won't go in past a certain point? Turd of a browser it is. It's a great way to start because, you know, one thing I love about it, it stops you thinking about iPad, iPhone, you know, those sort of things. But it's definitely not the answer. Really, what you should be doing is gathering a bunch of old crap devices that people are throwing away across the spectrum and getting a little toolkit. Who's heard of Clear Left, UK-based things? There's a guy at Clear Left called, forgot his name, Jeremy Keith, putting blog posts out at the moment. He did a call out to everyone in the community around his area in Brighton and asked them all to bring in their mobile phones. You should be doing that here. Get someone centrally located in the area. All of you chuck in your old mobile devices, shove them out on a desk and get a test kit. And everyone from the area can just pop in, test it, and they'll go get Bootstrap, and they'll go to all these things, and they bang a site together, and as the gentleman up the back said, they're all the same. But that's not the point. You can't override them. But they bring in all these components, because that's the way it's done. But it's like building a battleship. Sometimes you need I was going to swear, a little tugboat. You don't need a battleship. So there are times when it's better to simplify. And the question you asked is, I've never had to use the modernizer. It's just something I haven't had to do. And I slightly worry that people dump these components in on the assumption it could be useful when it may not ever be needed. So I generally try and wait until I need it. So on a real-world site, I've done a lot of testing with it, but on a real-world site, I've never actually used it.
So what do you, like, backing up from the site, the government site where they, said no JavaScript, when you're allowed to use JavaScript, I mean, how do you generally do it?
I've just used very simple JavaScript, like a shim and then, respond.js. So I try and keep things simple. I mean, I'm a simple guy. I've only got a tiny bit of an IQ, so any of those sort of things are beyond my capacity. And keep in mind, I'm a front-end guy, so I'm doomed to fail anyway.
What are your thoughts on CSS preprocessors like less than Sass during your responsibility?
Totally different discussion. I'm not a friend of Sass, and as I just said, I'm a front-end guy. With Sass, you have to go to terminal. Now, I'm actually allergic to the terminal. Touch it, I break out in hives. I love less, but I love the compiler less. I think this is insane, but you can actually run less live on the server using JavaScript to compile. Does anyone think that's the most insane thing on earth? What you can actually do is turn off JavaScript and, I keep going to swear, every single style in your site will disappear. But less has this great compiler. Is that what you use? I love it. It's a compiler, so you can write... who has no idea what we're talking about? Okay, so... How are we going to go?
1 minute.
1 minute, okay. What these are is preprocessors. So let's just take a quick example. You have 10 colours. You have a huge website, you've got 10 colours. And every time you come to the site, this little area, you've got to reference the colour. And you're like sick of it. You're writing an href, like a hex colour, and you've got to remember it. There's a chance you may misspell it, yeah? What less and Sass and these things are able to do is to reference them at the top of the document, say, here's colour 1 to 10, and then down your document, just go colour 1. The advantage is up at the top, you can then change colour 1, and it's done right through the document. That's just a tiny example. Another one would be linear gradients. To do a good linear gradient, you should do WebKit, Moz, MS, O, and then the real one. Every time you bring in a linear gradient. Now on the site you may have 15 or 20 of them. You could write that as a variable once at the top. And then when you bring it down below, just change the colours. And that'll rewrite them all for you. There's a lot of other things I'm doing there. But basically, fundamentally what they'll do is they'll just allow you to use variables. Who has been wanting to use variables in CSS? I mean, I'm a front-end guy, and even I can see the need for variables in CSS. Okay, I think we're out. We've got to run. We literally have to jump in a cab and go to a plane. So huge thank you. Sorry we're so rushed. But I hope it's worth it.